welcome to this class. So I'm going to explain a little better how to create these water droplets. First of all, when you have, let's see, I'm just going to do it with a pencil and then we're going to do it together with colors. So you have water droplets. So first of all, where is the highlight? Source of light will be coming from here. So this is where we're going to have small highlights. You can use masking fluid for watercolors. It might be helpful. Or even just a wax stick, that would be okay too. Now, the shadow, the main dark shadow is going to be coming here. This is going to be the shadow, the biggest shadow. And then, right underneath the droplet, on the outside of the circle. So this is going to be another dark shadow. I have a line here, that's because this is for the, so we have a line for the biggest highlight, which is right here. So this is going to be right here, the biggest highlight. So now we have a shadow on the outside of the circle, and then shadow on the inside of the circle, which is the darkest one, right? And then we blend it very gently, this dark shadow on the inside toward the middle, but very gently. So it becomes more and more diluted paint with water. Well, here, all this on the bottom of the circle is very light. We can leave it paper white. That's going to be our biggest highlight. But here, we just have to make sure that the inside shadow is the darkest on top, and we leave these little highlights paper white, and then we just blend it toward the bottom of the circle. And then we work on this biggest shadow or the darkest shadow on the outside of the circle. So this is how we paint water droplets. Now we're going to put this into practice. So now please draw a couple circles. They're not perfect. Nothing has to be perfect. And right away from the start, let's either use a wax stick or masking fluid. I'm going to grab a wax stick because it's much faster than waiting for masking. So this is going to be my highlight here. And this is going to be my highlight, and another highlight. Now, shadow, the darkest shadow. So I want you to draw on the inside of the circle. Is going to be on the top, like a crescent moon. This is going to be the biggest shadow, the darkest shadow. On the inside of the circle. Now we also need to show, this is where the light is coming from. That's why we have these little highlights on the inside. So I use the wax stick again, right? Next thing, let's draw like a crescent moon almost on the outside of the circle. This is going to be your cast shadow on the bottom of the, or underneath the circle. So shadow and shadow, 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 highlights on the inside. You can do it wet on dry, or you can do it wet on wet. I'm going to show this wet on wet. So we're going to wet it. So wet the inside of the circle. So now we drew a line here. We have a line. It looks like a crescent moon, right? It's outside of the circle. The bottom of the circle here needs to stay as light as possible. So we're not going to introduce any color on the bottom of the circle. We're going to start by adding colors from the top and blend the color. So very gently spread it toward the middle section of the circle. So for this, we could use like a cream to white ratio of water and paint. I'm just going to use like some paint I have. This is like a quinacridone red and cobalt blue. I already have colors like blended, overly blended on my palette because I was just painting the roses. But this is where you're applying this either heavy cream or cream top from the top. So again, the light is coming from this. That's why we have these highlights. That's why you see these highlights, and I use the wax stick. And then I just want to blend it toward the bottom, but I don't want to lose highlights on the bottom. This is the biggest highlight here on the bottom. So this is where you gently blend it in the middle. So we have different values of the shadow. And the darkest part of the shadow is on the top. It should be even darker. So I'm just grabbing a little more paint, cream top like ratio between water and paint. So that's the top of the shadow. Now this has to dry. So since it has to dry, I might as well work on this one in a second. I just want to add a little more color. Just so it's slightly blended. Use a damp brush to move the paint around. I'm going to clean the brush. Now let's work on this one while we're waiting for the other one to dry. Same thing. Wet the inside of the circle. So just the middle of the circle. And we're going to do the same thing. It's the same principle, whether you paint with watercolors, oils, acrylics, it doesn't matter. The principle of painting a water droplet is all the same, all about light and shadows. All right, now I'm going to grab creamy paint. So this is my, again, cobalt blue and a little bit of quin red. I'm starting from the top of the circle, right above these actually highlights that I made with a wax stick. This is the darkest part of the circle. And then I'm wiping my brush on a towel because I need to slightly blend these colors so I can create like a mid-value here. So mid-value. There you go. Well, I moved the shadow this way. So actually, here it is. I gotta explain this to you. Because I moved a little bit the shadows this way, and this is the most highlighted part, this is where I should have the cast shadow now. I should move it. Why? Because this cast shadow should be on the opposite side, exactly on the opposite side of this most highlighted part on the bottom of the droplet. So I'm not gonna actually add it here. I'm gonna focus on adding it right in here. So I'm gonna let this to dry, and let's work on these shadows on the outside of the circle, on the opposite side. Now, it's time to add these cast shadows. I'm gonna do this one, wet on dry, this one, wet on wet. So I'm going to grab this, or try to grab the same colors. I'm gonna start with the wet on dry. So it's gonna be easier to explain it. This is water to milk-like ratio, the same colors. It actually should have a little, slightly more blue since this is so bluish. Still red and blue. So this is where I need to focus on adding a cast shadow because it needs to be attached to like the most highlighted area that you can see here. So that's where the biggest, highlight is. I guess my demonstration is not going to be as pretty, but I hope you get the idea. And I'm going to clean the brush. And just with a damp brush, I'm going to blend it so it's soft. So it looks nice and soft. So that's a mistake. That shouldn't be on the inside. Now I have a contrast, right? I have a contrast, and I'm going to remove this later by lifting colors. And then let's focus on this one. So I'm going to add it wet on wet. So that means I have to wet the paper first. Wet it, wet it. Doesn't have to be perfect. This is just considered an exercise. So don't worry about like a mistake like I just made there. There you go. So I have water around the droplet, maybe like the bottom half. This is the biggest highlight. This is where I need the color. I'm gonna grab the same colors, cream top-like ratio this time, or even heavy cream is fine. And right on the outside of my circle, I need that highlight. I'm sorry, the shadow. I need that shadow, the darkest shadow, on the opposite side, where I have this biggest highlight, right? You can add a little more color, just so the contrast is larger. So I have a bigger contrast. So we painted this one wet on wet, the bottom, and then this one wet on dry. Now here's what I can do. With a damp brush, I can still soften it, or smooth the layer. That's what I mean, smooth it. The principle is all the same. You want to have a shadow, a dark shadow on the outside of the circle, on the opposite of where you have this highlight. And we start from here, and we need those highlights on the inside, because that's the source of light comes from here. This is where the light is coming from. That's why I have these little highlights. So I hope I was able to explain a little more in this class, and please let me know if you have any questions.